patrons, today we'll be drawing this red pepper. Now I'll be drawing this today with pencils from the set of 72 Prismacolor, and I'll be drawing it on smooth Bristol board paper. I'll include in the post all of the colours that I'm using. Now before we get started drawing, let's take a minute to have a look at the reference photo. I'm looking for the most obvious things I need to bear in mind. So let's start off by looking at the pepper itself, and the main things I'm noticing initially is the patches of light. Now the lightest part of the pepper is on the left hand side. The light looks like it's coming from this side, so it's generally a much brighter red along here, or in some cases a very vibrant orange. There are these very prominent patches of light along here which look like they're made up of a few different colors. There's a kind of grey color here, it's a little bit more yellow on this side, and then there's some pink patches running through them as well, and I'd say that's very much the same on all of them. Here looks a little bit more pink, as does here. This patch looks a bit more grey, very light grey. Because the pepper has bumps, there are odd shadows around the pepper, so there's a line along here, and then there's this very dark section down the bottom. It's also very dark here, and you can kind of get an idea for some of the bumps here as well. But all in all, I'd say the shapes look reasonably simple, and it's worth bearing in mind that it is an extremely smooth item, so I'm going to want to try and build it up in as smooth a way as possible to try and make this skin look nice and clear. Now looking at the stalk, there's a few different colours here. We've got some very light greens, particularly on the left and also here, and then there's some kind of lines going up the stem, again creating a kind of ridged stalk. So I'm going to want to add in and mark in all of these lines, but all in all this doesn't look too tricky if we just build up the shape. So those are the main things that I'm initially noticing. Let's start drawing. Now I want to start this pepper in the way that I usually would. So I want to start from the lighter colours, and we're going to gradually map everything out, going from the lighter colours to the darker colours. So I want to start off by looking on the red area of the pepper, and I'm looking for the lightest colour within this area. So I would say the lightest colour is the very light grey in these light patches. And there are a lot of light patches. There's here, along here, here, and these three patches here, as well as along here. So let's take a very light grey pencil. This is the 20% French grey that I'm using here. And I want to map out and block in these areas. Now, first up, this is made much easier because I have marked a lot of them out on my sketch, so I do have a good idea on where they need to go. All I want to do is put the pencil down really nice and lightly and smoothly in these areas. Now I'm going about this in the way that I would normally, so I want to be pressing really nice and lightly. I want to be able to build up a lot of colours on top of each other, so I don't want to press hard. And to help me press lightly, I'm holding the pencil further back than you might expect. So I'm holding this pencil about halfway down the barrel, and what that does is it stops me from being able to press too hard. It makes it so much easier to press lightly. It does make it a little bit harder to control where the pencil's going, so when I get to a point that I want to control a bit better where this is going, I do hold it closer to the tip and just control my pressure. But right now I can hold it a bit further back. I also want to be working in circular motion, so because I want this to go down as smoothly as possible, I don't want to have a really scribbly texture. You'll see that I'm working in these little circle or oval motions, and that just puts down the pencil in a much more consistent way. And this is so important for not only this colour but all of the colours for the whole drawing. We're going to need to focus on putting the pencil down smoothly, and I always want to do that with these circular motions, pressing lightly. Now another thing to bear in mind is having a nice and sharp pencil. The pencil goes down in a much more consistent way with a sharp pencil, and particularly with Prismacolors, they wear down a bit faster than something like polychromos, so I do need to sharpen the pencil reasonably frequently. So you can just about see my sketch here. You can see that I'm working my way around, putting this colour down on all of the lighter spots, or in some cases some slightly darker spots, but I think they do have a little bit of a grey undertone. Not dark spots though. And once I've got down all of the grey in all of the areas where I can see a little hint of this colour, I want to think about the next lightest colour. So as I said, I generally want to be working from the lighter colours towards the darker colours. We've got down that lightest. I would say the next lightest colour that is missing is this kind of pink colour that you can see here and here. And you can also see it a little bit around this patch. This is kind of a infinity sign, a sideways 8 here, because it's got this line going down the middle. It's all surrounded by pink. And these patches here just have a real pink tone to them, where they're not as light as these patches. So I'm going to use this pencil here. This is just called pink. And I'm going to put this pink on top of any of the grey where I can see a slight hint of pink. So that is generally around the edges, I'm finding, of these grey patches. Now I should clarify, when I'm working from the lighter colours to the darker colours, I don't expect to get every single colour. Now actually I would say that there is, particularly to the left, some more yellow tones to some of these lighter areas. We can add that in a little bit later. What I'm wanting to do is get the most obvious colours marked in. The goal in this section is really to get our bearings, to work out what needs to go where, and then it can be built upon as we go. But for now I just want to do those most obvious colours. So you can see I'm filling in these two patches. As I mentioned, it kind of looks like a sideways 8. So I can map in around the edge of here and then fill in some of the pink on these patches that I think do have a more greyish pink look to them. And the same on these patches here. So you can see I'm still holding the pencil reasonably far back, not too far back, because I do want to control where this colour is going. I'm still working in circular motions and I'm still working with a really sharp pencil. So once I filled in the pink areas, I once again want to look at the reference photo and I'm looking for the next lightest colour on particularly the red skin itself. So the next lightest colour I would say is this kind of orangey tone around here. And when you look for it, you can kind of see hints of this orange throughout the pepper. So what I'm going to do is use this pencil. This is again just called orange, and I'm going to put this over the whole of the pepper. Now I'm working around the light patches that I've added in. I want to get really nice and smooth gradients going up to these patches, and then I literally want to put a solid block of this colour on the pepper, and this is going to be our underlying base layer that we can build the rest of the colours on. Now once again, the important things here is pressing really nice and lightly, working in those circular motions and working with a nice and sharp pencil. And the things I'm particularly focusing on is, as I say, getting that smooth gradient around the light patches, but I'm also being so careful as I work my way around the edge. I want to have a really nice and crisp line around the edge of the pepper. I don't want to colour outside the line. Now, as I say, there is more of this colour on the left-hand side than there is on the rest of the pepper, but I'm just going to put this colour everywhere. I think that's going to create a richer colour underneath, and it's going to be easier for us to get our bearings a little bit faster. As I say, I just want to know what needs to go where, and then it'll be much easier when we start building up those darker colours. So let's go through this reasonably quickly, because actually it is literally just a case of blocking in the orange, being careful around the edge to not go over the sketch lines. And I am literally working around these light patches and blocking in the orange. And you can really start to see those circular motions here, for example, where it is putting down the pencil really smooth. We expect it to look really light and bright at this point. And I also don't really expect it to look like a pepper at this point. So I find it easiest to work from the left to the right, and generally speaking from the top to the bottom as well. So once I've got all of this orange colour mapped in, I've got the pencil down reasonably smoothly. You'll see it's not perfect. I don't expect to get it perfect. That's what building up all these layers is going to do bit by bit. What I now want to do is look for our next darkest colour. So now I'm looking at the kind of red around here. This is a really bright and vibrant, but still slightly orangey red. So I want to look for my closest match to this kind of colour. So let's use the poppy red. This is, I would say, a bright red, but slightly more on the side of orange. And I'm also putting this colour most most places, but I am putting a lot less on the left-hand side. This side along here, as I mentioned, I think does have a lot more of that orange tone to it, but I maybe don't want to leave it as bright orange as it is right now. Now, whilst I'm filling in this color, I am going to begin to map in some of the lines and shadows very, very roughly, so that when I move on to a darker pencil, it gets a little bit easier. So let's still go down this light patch. I want to be blending into that light patch. I don't want to have a really sharp line. So I'm just really easing up my pressure when I get to the light patch. And you'll also see I'm putting a nice and crisp line around the edge. It's going to look much better with a nice sharp line. I'm going all along this line here. Now, I mentioned earlier, there's a slightly darker kind of triangle down the bottom here. And I will be putting a darker color over this area, but it's going to be easier if I can start mapping in some of these shapes now with this much lighter pencil. And then I can work over this with circular motions in the same way again. This is all a reasonably time-consuming process, but I wouldn't say it's too tricky. We just need to be gradually building up the pencil, gradually building up all the vibrancy. And by doing it nice and slowly, not only are we allowing ourselves to make any mistakes, if we do make a mistake, it's much more forgiving. It'll be easy to correct because these are much lighter colors than they will be at the end. But also we're going to create a much smoother color because we're not just pressing really hard with the pencil. So now let's also use this pencil to fill in some of the shapes up the top up here. You'll notice that there's a very prominent line along here. There's also these two lighter lines going along here and along here. So I'm going to use this red pencil to just map in where those lines and shapes need to be. I find it easiest to literally look at this as a series of shapes. That's all we're drawing here. We're not really drawing a pepper. We're drawing some shapes that will make up a pepper. So let's mark in those lighter lines and then shade around it. And then I'm going to start shading in the rest of the pepper. So pretty much for the rest, I want to work around those light spots once again, but I really just want to go over this in the same way I did with the orange. And you'll see as we go here, it starts to look a lot smoother as I build more layers up. But I can't stress enough at this point, we don't expect it to look amazing. It is something that's going to build up as we go. So let's keep working from these lighter colors towards the darker colors. And I'm now going to use a darker red. Now this is crimson red. This is just a really deep and rich red. I think it is probably the main color on a lot of the pepper. And I want to start putting this color anywhere I can see this color or darker. So again, that is this patch down the bottom where I've already marked this in with the poppy red a second ago. And I can go over this whole area at the bottom, which will be darker than this color. But as I say, I want to put it anywhere that is this color or darker. You'll notice when I'm using this pencil, I am using a pencil extender. This pencil is a little bit too short for how I could comfortably hold the pencil. By putting a pencil extender on here, it's just far more comfortable to hold. And I will be able to use it until it's really quite short. I'll get a lot more life out of this pencil than I otherwise would. So I can go over those areas at the top. And then I particularly want to focus on putting this color towards the center. Notice how dark this patch in the middle is. This is a mixture, I would say, of a very dark red, but also a dark brown, and maybe even a little bit of purple, but we'll talk about that in the next chapter. So I want to build up a reasonable amount of this color towards the middle around here. And actually, really, this whole right-hand side will need to be a lot darker. So I need to go over this area again. And every time I add another layer of color, I think the whole pepper looks smoother. I do want to avoid a slightly lighter patch I can see on this right-hand side. I'm looking at this patch here. But for the most part, I'm just filling in this color over the whole bottom of the pepper. So now I'm generally happy with a lot of the base layers I have on the pepper itself. What I now want to think about is filling in something on the green stalk before I then move on to the darkest color I'll be using probably in the whole drawing. So we're going to work through this process again, but this time on the stem. And I want to be looking for the lightest color within here. So the lightest color I would say is this very light green. It's quite a bright and vibrant green. green. So I'm going to use the spring green pencil, and I want to put a really nice and light layer over the whole stem area to begin with. We will be mapping in a lot of the shapes in a second, but to begin with, I just want to put a nice and smooth, even layer of this colour over the stem. I'm being very, very careful not to go, again, over the edges. I want to go all along these areas that are going up against the red and then up and around the end. Again, notice that I'm holding the pencil not really close to the tip, but closer than I have been because I want to be very precise on where this pencil is going. And notice that I'm working in circular motions. I have a nice and sharp pencil. I'm doing exactly the same as we have been before now. So once I've got this nice and smooth colour, what I now want to think about is marking in the shapes I can see within the pepper. And I want to do this with a light pencil, again, because it's more forgiving. It means that if I make a mistake, I can easily correct it with the darker colours. I'm not completely committing to where this is going immediately. So I'm marking in a lot of the lines I can see on the pepper. You'll see that I'm generally marking in the outline, so I'm going along my sketch line here. And then once I've marked the line, I will shade in between 2 points where I need to. When we look at the lines on this pepper, there are a number of lines going down. There's this line along here. There's a very dark line along here. There's 2 lines along here, and then it's a little bit lighter in between. I'm looking at all of these lines, looking at where this stops at the bottom along here. There's this kind of curvy, bumpy line. I want to map all of that in, add some light shading, and the goal is it will look like this, but lighter. I'm noticing that it's much darker on this right-hand side here, but there is a little light patch that I'm going to want to avoid, a little light triangle on the right-hand side here. And I want to map in this shape at the end here. And it's very, very light, but I can get a really good idea of where all of this needs to go so that when I go in with a darker colour, I'm not just doing it blind. I can see what needs to go where. Now, again, make sure that you keep your pencil really nice and sharp. It's going to be so much easier to work out where all of these lines need to go and create really nice and crisp lines. It hasn't taken too long really to map in all of these shapes. So once I'm happy that I think it's looking reasonably accurate to the reference photo, what I then want to do is go over these areas with a darker green. So I'm looking at the dark green in the reference photo, comparing it to my colours, and I would say I need a kind of bog standard dark green. So this pencil is called dark green, and I'm going to go over all of these lines that I marked out with that lighter green, but they're starting to look a bit more prominent. As I say, I'm more confident with where they need to go. So I would say that this area is reasonably simple, especially once all those shapes are initially mapped in. There aren't a huge amount of colours in this area at the top. It's just quite a lot of nice gradients and lights and dark areas. So I want to mark in this shape at the end here. And then before I move on, I'm just going to check any green areas down the bottom near the red as well. So I want to mark in this bumpy line, and there's quite a deep shadow around here with a line coming down. And then there's all of these little marks along here, and it's quite dark green along here. So I can mark all of these areas in as well. Now at this point, I am generally happy that I have a lot of this marked out. I am really getting what needs to go where. Let's now think about marking in the darkest pencil. And for this, I'm going to use my very, very dark brown. This is the dark umber. Now I'm going to start off by going over the darker areas at the top. Notice that even though this is a very dark pencil, I'm still pressing nice and lightly, so it's not going down as dark as it can go. I don't want to do that at this point. And for this top area, there's really only a few parts where I need to be adding this darker pencil. I'm particularly looking here, coming around here, coming down here, and around the edge mostly of this patch, and around here along here. But as I say, this is all made so much easier because we've already mapped a lot of these shapes in with the lighter colours, so I can be a bit more confident on where this pencil needs to go. Let's also add the darker colour onto the pepper, the red area. So I want to add some of this colour in this darker patch down here. As I've mentioned a few times, this area does need to be a lot darker than the the colours I have built up. Again, notice that I'm using this really nice and lightly. I don't want to build up the full darkness yet because I'm still just trying to get my bearings on what needs to go where. I just want to map something in. I'm also, whilst I've got this pencil, going to mark in some of the shadows. So there are some very prominent shadows down the bottom, which I don't currently have anything marked in. I think it would look better if I do lightly mark something in. So I'm just filling in this kind of rounded shape and then fading it out. I want to get quite a nice little fade, and I'm not pressing hard here. I want a really nice and light shadow, and we can decide later how much this is built up. Now let's also build up a lot of this color towards the middle. You'll see that I'm marking a line down the right hand side of where I am. I'm particularly noticing this line coming down here, and then there's quite a dark patch here to the right of that line. There's also the line coming down here, and it's generally darker underneath the line. So let's map in the line and then use circular motions to build up a little bit of this color to hopefully get an idea of where these darker values or darkest values will need to go. So reasonably quickly, really, I've got something that does resemble a pepper, but it looks way too light. It doesn't look very vibrant right now, but it is very clear what needs to go where. In the next chapter, I'm going to be able to focus on looking at the actual colors that make up the pepper and really making the whole thing look more vibrant. I'm just going to add a shadow down the bottom here just to match the shadow on the left. And then that is the end of this first section. In this chapter, I solely want to focus on building up the contrast. So what I'm going to do is work through only a few colours, really, not that many colours, to build up the contrast, really get the more shadowed areas of the pepper standing out. And I'm starting here with a colour which might surprise you. This is the dark purple. Now this specific purple is quite rich, almost reddish purple, and it's going to create a really lovely backdrop for the richer, darker areas. So let's have a look at the colours and the shapes that are really in this main shadowed area. So I'm particularly looking at this area all along here and this patch here. This whole shadowed area here has a rich purple to it. I think you can particularly see it around here. It's not a really vibrant purple. It's got a lot of other colours mixed into it, but it is a very strong colour that I can see in this area, and that's particularly because it's a shadow. So what I'm doing is building up the purple pencil over this whole area, trying to make it more vibrant, and we will add other colours over the top of this so it won't look as prominent as it does at the moment, but this is really a strong colour that we're going to use a couple of times in this chapter, which is going to give extra richness to this patch. Now in terms of how I'm building up the colour, I'm building this up in exactly the same way as I did in the first chapter. I am still pressing mostly lightly, still working in circular motions and still working with a really nice and sharp pencil. Now I say I'm mostly pressing lightly. You'll find when you build up coloured pencils that you can start off with some really light layers, but the more colours you build up, you do have to start pressing a little bit harder the more pencil you put down if you want that pencil to show. And by the end, I will need to be using a firm pressure just to build up the pencil on top of the other pencil. So I am still using a light pressure, but maybe not quite as light as it was before. So you can see I've gone over this whole patch. It's the same patch that we marked in before. I'm adding some of this purple a little bit over to the left hand side as well, and it looks a little bit patchy, but that's okay. So let's build up some other colours over the top of this, and I always want to be thinking about the most obvious colour that's missing. So we're generally staying with these darker colours and looking at the more shadowed areas. Now that I've added in the purple, I think it's missing a little hint of deep red, so I'm going to use the crimson red. This is that dark red that we used in the last chapter, to just lightly go over some of these more shadowed areas to build up a bit more of this red. I'm not adding a huge amount, but I want to add a little bit more. So I'm starting off by focusing on this area on the left hand side, and I'm also just going to define the edge. There is actually quite a sharp edge around the pepper, so let's add that in and then add some general shading, just even a little bit here. I find builds up all of the vibrancy really quite a bit. Let's go over all of the purple as well, once again using these circular motions, and you can see it's kind of toning down that purple, making it look a little bit less bright. It's making it blend in a bit better into the pepper, and I'm really blending out of the edge of the purple to try and smooth those out, make it not look like such a solid block. So you'll see I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly because I spend so much time going over the same areas over and over again. This whole chapter took about an hour to film, but it's really a process of me doing the same thing over and over again. So let's go over this whole lighter patch in the middle of this purple section, and already I think that's looking so much better. I'm going to add a little bit to the right hand side as well, and then let's move on to the dark umber. So I'm once again building up this pencil, going over those same patches I did with the purple. Now this is my very, very deep brown, and it's really going to build up the bulk of the contrast here, but we want to add other colours in to either blend out the edges or generally make it look a little bit less harsh. This is the closest pencil that I have to black without using black. And I can work on this bottom section as well. You can see all of the circular motions I'm using and how it's all starting to look a little bit smoother. The more pencil that I build up, the less patchy I find it looks. So let's not forget to go over this area on here as well. It's got a very deep shadow, especially at the bottom here. So I want to make this a little bit darker. I'm still not pressing hard here though. I'm pressing nice and lightly, and we will be building this up more as we go. Now I am going to go over this bottom bit a little bit more because this area is so much darker, and I'm using a little bit of a firmer pressure at this point. You can see that I'm starting to press a little bit harder where I'm making the pencil darker, but by no means am I pressing full force or anything close to full force. So let's keep going, keep building up these darker areas. You can see I'm flitting a little bit between the areas. So I focused on building up more of the pencil at the bottom. Now I'm focusing on building up more of the pencil on this middle section. And I think you can really see how going over an area again and again and again starts to build up really quite a dark colour. Now I don't want to forget to add a little bit of detail around on this right hand side, partly making the edge a bit more prominent, and just generally add a bit more shading around this very light patch. And I'm also just going to extend the shadowed area a little bit more towards the light patch on the left here. So now that I've added in this dark brown or dark umber, I think it shows that we need to add more of a reddish brown. It's all looking a little bit too flat. It's not looking warm enough. So let's add in the sienna brown. This is my reddish brown. It's not massively dark, but it does have a really good red tone to it. And I can just build this up on top of anywhere where I put that dark umber. And you can see that it's making the colours still look nice and dark, but it just looks richer. And I'm going not only over the area where I added that dark umber, but also all around the surrounding patches, really spreading this out and helping to blend those darker areas in with the surrounding lighter areas. It makes it all look a bit softer. Also, this patch here in the middle of all the dark areas is looking a little bit too light. So adding this sienna brown over the top is just helping, again, blend this with its surrounding areas. And I'm literally going over this area and building it up, adding more of this pencil, the nice and sharp pencil with circular motions, nice and lightly. And reasonably quickly you can start to see the shadow being built up. Now let's just tidy up around the edge and then shade down the bottom here. That purple that we added in now, you can barely even see it really. And I'm just building it up little bit by little bit. Not forgetting to also go over this area on the left hand side as well. Build up a little bit more to try and smooth out where I put that dark umber on the left too. And then I want to start thinking about the next colour I want to be building up. So actually now that I've built up and softened everything with that sienna brown, I feel like the darkest areas aren't looking dark enough. So let's go back to that dark umber, and the areas that do need to be especially dark, I'm going to really focus on them. So I'm pressing a little bit firmer now just because we have so much pencil on the paper. I need to press a little bit harder to get this pencil to build up, but you can see I'm not pressing hard. I am holding my pencil closer to the tip though, so I can have a bit more control over where this is going. And I'm still working in those circular motions though, and I've still got a really nice and sharp pencil. It's probably the most important thing about this is having a sharp pencil. So let's build up on this strip down the bottom, and you can see how going over the area over and over again really builds up that contrast. I'm also going to go over the shadow down the bottom down here because it's just looking too light in comparison to the pepper itself. And then I'm going to start focusing on building up some more of this darker colour on this strip going down here, this very dark strip. I don't want to have any harsh edges on the patch though, so I'm always making sure that I'm smoothing out what I'm doing. And we're really starting to get the contrast that we need on this area of the pepper just by building up these few colours on top of each other. So let's add a little bit along this right hand side, and then I'm also going to build up some more of this colour in this shadowed area down here, both on the pepper, and I want to build up some more of that shadow so it matches the shadow on the right hand side. And the dark umber is probably the main colour I'm using for the vast majority of this chapter because it just needs so much building up because it's our main shadow. So now I've built up that dark umber on the shadow, I once again think it's not looking rich enough. I want to go back to that dark purple and just brighten up what's here, make it a darker, more kind of reddish tone, which this purple is perfect for. So let's go over the whole of the pepper again, going over all of these areas with the dark umber. And hopefully you're starting to see that we're just building up the color one step at a time. I don't ever really think too much beyond the next color that needs to be added, because you don't truly know exactly what that color is going to do. So once we've added in this purple, I find that it becomes much easier and more apparent to see the next color that we need to add in, the next color that the drawing is missing. So this purple, now that it's been added in, is looking so bright. It's got a lot more kind of depth to the shadows, and I'll be able to go over in a second and maybe tone that down a little bit. So let's not forget to put the purple in this shadowed area over here as well, before moving back onto that sienna brown, that reddish brown. And this is perfect, I find, for just slightly toning down the purple. It turns it into a slightly more natural looking color for the pepper. So I can go over this whole patch again, building up this sienna brown, and those darker areas are really starting to blend nicely with their surroundings. So now the final thing that I'm going to do in this chapter for now is add in more dark umber. The darker shadowed areas still to me aren't looking dark enough. So once again going back to the same pencil, and you can see how dark these shadowed areas are now starting to get. They are starting to really match the reference. Now as I get to this point, I'm reasonably happy with the shadowed areas with the contrast. What I now particularly feel I need to do is brighten up the lighter areas, and that will make it much more obvious what else needs adding. I'm going to want to go back to all of those reds that I built up before. So let's have a look at that in the next section. For now, you should have a pepper where the contrast looks much better and it just needs brightening up and all of the colors need tweaking. But that is it for this chapter. So now that I've built up all of those mid-tones and darker colours, let's look at really brightening up the pepper itself first. So I'm going to start here by adding a bright red over the top. I'm going back to that crimson red, that really deep red. So my goal here is to be thinking about the most obvious colour that's missing in each section, but also generally be working from the darker colours towards the lighter colours again. And then I'm going to end up with a much more vibrant pepper. So I want to be first off brightening everything up by using this dark red. And I want to be going over anywhere that is this colour or darker. So I'm starting off by really focusing on this darker patch towards the middle. You can start to see I'm beginning to use a more medium pressure. So the more pencil that I put down on the pepper, the harder I have to begin pressing to get the pencil to go down. To start with, I could be pressing really, really lightly and get a good amount of pencil still down on the paper. But as we build up more of the colour, I do find I have to press a little bit firmer. I'm not pressing full force by any means. I would say, using a medium pressure. Beyond that though, I very much want to go about this in a very similar way to what I have been up until now. I still want to try and get this skin as smooth as possible. So I'm still working in circular motions. You can see me working in little oval motions here. And I'm still working with a really nice and sharp pencil. I find particularly as I get towards the end, particularly with Prismacolors, I do need to sharpen my pencil more often to get a decent amount of the pigment on the paper. So you can see I'm working around these light patches here, and then I can start working over to the right hand side, work around these light patches. I think when I start building up some of the colour, especially on some of the lighter areas, I do think it looks a little bit kind of harsh. It looks not quite right, but I can see it needs more red in these areas, so I should add them. And once I add other colours as well and start working towards those lighter colours, I think it's going to start looking a lot softer and really start blending nicely together. So you can see I'm working towards the left hand side. There's a few kind of darker patches that are sticking out towards the left, so I'm filling those in, but there's not a huge amount more that I need to be doing on this area here. Most of the areas now to the left get a lot lighter, and I'll need to fill it in with lighter reds, oranges, a lot of the colours I used in the very first chapter. I do want to add a little bit of the red along here though. This is a particularly dark patch, so let's just build up a bit more of this colour here, and then what I want to do is work my way down through the colours. So I've added in the darkest red. What I now want to think about is adding in a brighter, lighter, more vibrant, slightly orangey red. So let's go back to the poppy red. This is a really good vibrant colour, and I want to put this over any area that I think is this colour or darker. So I am very much going to be going over a lot of the areas where I put that red a second ago, and I think it's going to really brighten it up. I think the overall red of the pepper is slightly more on the kind of orangey side. I don't have a dark red that is a little bit orange, so adding this red over the top of the crimson red I think makes a really good colour. And I'm going to go through this a little bit faster now because it's quite a time consuming process, but it is reasonably simple. So you can see me adding the poppy red over this area here. Once I add the red in, you can really see how light this area was before. I do want to go over some of the more mid-tone areas of that crimson red. I do think it makes such a big difference to the colour. It makes it look so much more vibrant. And I still want to be, I would say it's still a medium pressure. I'm still frequently sharpening my pencil. The pencil's going to go down in a so much more consistent way if it's nice and sharp. It's going to be a little bit patchy, I find, if I let it get too blunt. And I still want to be working in circular motions because I do want this to be really smooth. And I am literally just blocking in this whole area. I am working around these patches of light on the left around here, but I want to be building up all of this red over this left hand side as well, going over where I put that crimson red a second ago, just avoiding that patch of light down in the bottom left hand side. But it's already looking so much more vibrant than it was just a short while ago by just adding in 2 colours. So I'm just going to go over a few areas. I've got a nicely sharpened pencil, so I'm just going to build up a bit more of this colour anywhere where I think it would benefit. And then I can think about adding in the next lightest colour. So I now want to go back to the pink pencil and really start brightening up some of the light patches. So some of these light patches are just looking way too light in comparison to the rest of the pepper now. So this pink is perfect for keeping the idea of the light patches. They almost look bright white at the moment, which I don't want them to. So you can see I'm going around particularly the edge of some of these patches to help blend the light patch into the surrounding bright red. It's looking much smoother when I do this. I'm also going to go along some of these patches on this right hand side where the patches are looking too light, and I think again they just need toning down, like around the edge of this patch here, for example. That's that kind of figure 8 shape. And then still going through the colours that I used before. This is now the French grey, the slightly darker French grey, and I want to be adding this to any area again where I think the light patch needs to be toned down. Maybe it's looking a bit too bright, but I don't think the pink is the appropriate colour to do this. So I'm particularly thinking about these areas up here, as well as around these light patches here. And I think that's already looking much, much better. I'll add a little bit of this colour down the bottom as well. And then I'm particularly wanting to brighten up this area around here. So I'm actually going to use a pretty vibrant yellow. We did before use a quite bright orange, but I think it just needs a little bit more of a brightness added here. So add in just a small amount of the yellow just in this area here, still using that kind of medium to light pressure with a sharp pencil. So you can see I'm generally using the same colors as I work down towards the lighter colors, but I do sometimes need to tweak the colors if I think maybe an area needs brightening up, for an example. So now, as I say, I'm still working towards the lighter colors, but I do constantly want to be thinking about the most obvious color that's missing at any point. So right now I would say that I'm missing a vibrant red again. I'm still not got enough of that kind of orangey red. So let's add in even more of the poppy red, particularly focusing a little bit more on this left hand side. Maybe I don't need to build up as much on the right now. And now that I've added in some more of this color, it becomes more obvious again the color that's needing adding next. So I'm going to move on to the lightest gray. I particularly want to start smoothing out these patches. So I'm just going to go over the lighter areas here. Now that I've added in that color, I can see that the kind of mid-tones are missing a certain darkness to them. So I'm going to go back to that sienna brown I used in the last chapter, that reddish brown, to really work on the mid-tones and make them look much deeper, much richer. So you can see it is just a case of working one color at a time. I think it is a process of constantly building up a surprising amount of colors really for a red pepper until it's looking like a good match to the reference. So now that I've built up a lot of this sienna brown, I am noticing that the darker area here isn't looking rich enough. Where in the last chapter I added in a lot of purple, it's just lost a lot of the vibrancy. So let's add in some more of that dark purple to exactly the same area that I added it in before, really building up the color a little bit further before going back to the crimson red and making the darker red areas stand out a bit more. So you'll see, very similar to the last chapter, I am going back to these same colors again and again and again, building them up, making the pepper bit by bit look richer. So I can add a lot of this dark red over the top of that purple, and again it tones down the purple a little bit, but I do think we're still keeping that certain richness, and it's making the whole pepper look a lot more uniform. So I'll go back to the darker French grey again, work on some of these light patches again, just build these up a little bit further, before going back to the crimson red, the darker red. I just particularly think that these light patches are looking a bit too harsh around the edge. And then I want to make the darker patches a bit darker again with the dark umber. Now at this point, I'm generally happy with the skin of the pepper. It is looking a little bit patchy, and I will come back to that in a short while. But for now, let's focus on the stem, on the green section, because we haven't really built up anything here since I think the first chapter. So I want to make that look a lot more vibrant. So let's carry on using this same pencil. I'm using the dark umber, and I want to use basically the template that I've created here to map out all of these sections a little bit clearer. So you can see I'm building up these same stripes that I marked out before, but now that I can see very clearly where they should all go, I can start applying more of the pencil, making it look a lot darker, a lot richer. Actually, on a lot of these areas, it's in quite a deep shadow. So I want to be building up the shapes that I've already marked in, but also building up a lot more color. So let's go over the end of the pepper here as well, really make these areas look quite a bit darker before going over all of the darker areas and the midtones with the dark green. Again, this is very, very similar to what I was doing before. I just want to be doing more. It's not looking like there's enough color here. So going over the dark umber with this dark green is turning that dark umber from just a dark brown into a kind of greenish brown, but it's making this green look a bit darker than it otherwise would. So I think mixing these two colors together, putting them on top of each other like this, is making a really good difference to this stem. So I'm once again using a light to medium pressure, I would say, to build up all of these areas of green. Before actually, I'm going to add the bright yellow that I used on the skin to these areas just to adjust the green slightly. I think the dark green would benefit from being a little bit more on the yellow side. So I can literally add some of this yellow over the top, and it turns a very dark green into a kind of more yellowish dark green. And then once I've done that, I think the dark areas once again aren't looking dark enough. So I'm going to go back in with the dark umber with a kind of medium pressure, I would say, to really build up the shadows. So now I'm generally pleased with the stem now. Let's once again start focusing on the pepper as a whole, particularly focusing on the skin. So I've added some of the darker umber on the skin. Let's add some white to smooth out these light patches now. I don't want to leave things looking really grainy. The whole goal here is to try and make a very nice and smooth looking pepper, because I want these patches to look nice and light, but I also want to apply a lot of pencil to smooth them out. White is really my only option here. I think if I use the 20% French grey that I've been building up on here up until now, it's going to end up looking a bit too dark in a lot of these areas. So I can go over down here, really build this up, and then I'm just going to flip through the colours a little bit more. So I still want to build up some more of this dark brown in these more shadowed areas. I still don't think the shadows looking quite dark enough. So I'm just going to take my time building up some more of this colour. And you can see how just pressing with a medium pressure and going over the area again and again is building up the colour to be quite a drastically different tone, really. So I'm generally pleased with all of the pepper. I think on the most part it is looking very good, very realistic, but it's still looking a little bit too grainy. There's a lot of white spots of paper that are showing through, I think, too much. So what I want to do is actually carry on using the same colours, but I'm going to approach it slightly differently. I'm now going to use that same poppy red. This is the reasonably lighter red. With a really, really sharp pencil, I am kind of focusing on drawing in those white spots. So you can see I'm not using a particularly firm pressure. I'm still using a medium pressure, but I'm holding my pencil, I would say, a little bit more upright than I usually would. I'm not so much holding it at such an angle to the paper, because I'm particularly trying to kind of get that point into those white spots. And I am frequently sharpening my pencil. If I want to do this, that's going to be the only way to try and fill up all of these white spots. And I'm generally speaking going to work from the left-hand side to the right. I find it easiest to work in a pretty methodical way. And you can see just by using circular motions, working with a really sharp pencil and really focusing on trying to fill up those white spots, working a bit more upright than we have done until now, I think actually reasonably quickly it's looking a lot less patchy. Now I think it's not going to be possible to make this look perfectly smooth like a printer would. It's important to remember that we're drawing a picture with coloured pencils. We are not a printer, but I do want it to look a bit less grainy. I want it to look a bit smoother. Now the reason that I'm working with this colour is that I don't want to work with something that's too light or too dark. This is probably slightly on the lighter side, but it's very much a mid-tone colour from all of the colours that I have been using in this drawing. So if I could get all of the light spots on some of the darker areas around here, for example, to be more of this tone, that is going to look much better than the white, for example. But I don't want to make everything drastically darker. I don't want to change everything that I've been building up until this point. Now I really only need to be doing this to the pepper skin. I'm not worrying about the stem. I don't think the stem looks as patchy. I don't think it's as really necessary for it to look as smooth as I want the skin here to look. But I can't stress enough that I still don't expect this to look absolutely perfectly smooth at the end. So now at this point I am much happier with how the skin's looking. I want to add in some absolute final tweaks now to the pepper. So I'm just going to tidy up around some of the edges of the light patches. I think some of them are looking a little bit too rough, a little bit too harsh. And then I'm going to use that dark brown again to just tidy up some of the shadows down the bottom. Again, I think it's looking a little bit too rough, a little bit too harsh down here. I'm going to work in some really small circular motions, building up this color, trying to get the gradient as smooth as I can here. And then that is it for the pencil. The absolute final thing that I want to do with this pepper is just tidy up some of the edges. So I got a few areas where the pencil has kind of smudged onto the background. I'm just using a putty eraser here to go around the edge, clean everything up, and then that is it. I hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.